our speaker this evening, I would choose passion. Roger Wagner likes what he does, and his commitment is obvious. He's a former high school science and math teacher. Roger is a book editor. He's a lecturer. He's a columnist. He's an international speaker. Best known as the designer of HyperStudio 3.0. This is that wonderful multimedia software that is currently being used by over 1 million students worldwide. He has many awards. One of the more recent ones is a Gold Award given by the United Kingdom for high school technology. But I would think he would probably be most appreciative and excited about his most recent AECT Annual Achievement Award. Without further ado, I'm sorry. Without further ado, please let me introduce Roger Wagner.
Thank you. Let's see. See if our sound is up here. Hello, 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 hello. Okay, can you hear me out there? Because that's like one of those little signs on the airplane, right, that says, if you can read this, alert a flight attendant. That's, that always makes me nervous. I don't know about you, but... okay, let's see. I was supposed to stand here for a moment while the... well, there was something about the... Are we doing it? As you can see, it's a very carefully planned presentation. I was supposed to stand here for a moment so the big camera at the back could put my face on the screen. I guess we're not going with that plan, are we? Well, I guess we're not switching between live cameras and that person at the podium. I think all the people in the control room have gone to sleep. What do you think? I think they said, Roger's going for the next hour. Let's go out, have a cup of coffee. All right. Well, I don't like these things anyway. So, with that in mind, I can barely see you out there. That was my second request, was that we actually illuminated the room a little bit, because I don't know really where to toss an eraser to wake up anybody in the back row. But I do want to thank you, especially, I have to admit, to be totally honest, I'm pleased with, oh, there they are, they're appearing, wow. And there is life in the control room. Thank you back there. Oh, this is great. And this way I see the smiling faces, and I know whether you're scowling or dozing off or getting infuriated. Hopefully, in the course of the hour, we'll do most of those, except perhaps the dozing off. Anyway, I have to say, this is really pleasing. I didn't know, considering when the exhibits were over and when the sessions were over, exactly how many people would show up here. So myself and my mom, thank you for all coming. My self-esteem has just grown immensely. It's just wonderful. As you can see, actually, I know this is a very serious conference, and we have a lot of very distinguished educators here, and I don't mean by my levity to diminish the importance of what I'll be talking about for the next hour, but as we were just chatting in the front row here with Dr. Billings, saying that my motto is, at the end of each day, I want to have had a good time by the end of that day, and if you all would like to come along with me, that's fine. If you'd rather be serious and dour for the day, that's kind of your decision. But for me, I'm going to be having a good time for the next hour, and I hope you'll join me. Basically what I'd like to talk about today is a bit of, I have to say, in the course of having some experience in multimedia in the classroom, what it's all about, what I thought it was all about in the beginning is radically different, of course, than what it all turned out to be. I thought the big deal was interactive, and everybody still talks about interactive TV and all that sort of thing. And I'll tell you a story. This really isn't an official part of the presentation, but somebody came up to the somebody that I could hit with one of these plants if I wanted to. Came up to our booth just as we were leaving and just said that they were in a situation where the students in the classroom that were using technology would have been students that would have been otherwise lost to the system. That somehow these students had found something different, something had changed in the classroom that really made it worthwhile going. And these stories abound, I suppose, but I thought it might be kind of nice to share one with you that was truly a watershed moment for me. And when I first designed our software, I thought that the interactive was the big word, and if you read kind of the introduction and whatever to the documentation, there's a big thing about the interactivity and how it was so great that you could be in a story and either go to page 7 or go to page 15 or whatever, and this was just great. What I didn't know was that basic technology had been mastered in the 1800s with dime novels that said if the hero should go into the saloon, go to this page, and if they should, that people could actually do branching in paperback books. This was a major revelation to me. And when I found out that in fact the first interactive, or not interactive, but the first sort of hypertext document that we have some record of is probably the Torah. I thought, ooh, maybe that wasn't what I was at. Well, something happened. Within about just a few months, I got a package in the mail from a correctional institution, a prison in Minnesota, as it turns out. And I guess as another aside, it turns out we have quite a following of HyperStudio users in prisons. So, when we say it's an institutional tool, it's really... But the letter that came with this, the teacher explained that this was a 16-year-old young man that made it to her class 2 days a week. And this was essentially, in fact, I call this, this essentially was not an at-risk student. This is a bin-risk student, right? So the story was related about how some of those kids on the edge that we might have lost found some interest in technology. This story is about students that, in fact, were, past tense of that process. And you have to remember that, of being lost, not of getting excited. And so anyway, the young man made it to class 2 days a week. Now this was what we'd normally considered a fairly structured environment. It's not the kind of place you just wander off to the local convenience store and forget about going to class that day. It was literally locked back up. And the teacher said, if you come in and can make it to my class and do whatever, because even in prisons they still have classrooms, I'll see that you get some time on the computer. This student came for 5 weeks straight and created literally an epic saga of a whole journey through the mountains, complete with a moral tale at the end about choosing between, monetary wealth and a wealth of spirit. And it was incredible. And when I looked at it, I realized that interactive wasn't the deal. That there were two things that were revealed in what was sent to me. And one of them was that the students suddenly had access to real things. They were controlling some of the most powerful technology in our culture, and that's a good feeling when you're participating in real things and not just doing busy work over in the corner. But the other thing was that I guess this is when I sort of had a new view on multiple intelligences, was the artwork and all of the other things were going. There were pages of the story. I mean, the epic tale that was there had more writing in it than you'd find in any classic paper. But the artwork was essentially nearly commercial quality artwork. And I suddenly realized this student was probably the sort that sat at the back of my classroom and drew on the desk and the book and in the book and on the wall. Today we call that a visual learner. But in fact, that's serious. I really mean that seriously, because what I found was, wait a minute, this multiple intelligence stuff isn't saying that we can go from 1 funnel to 7 and we've got more ways of pouring stuff inside a kid. It's recognizing also that there are as many different expressive styles, and that interactivity without investing something of the human being in it is just a touch-tone phone. I mean, you can think of touch-tone phones as interactive radio, if interactive is all you want. And with 500 button channels on a TV, they're already interactive. If that's if only choice is your definition of interactive, then we've got that already. Personal expression is something else. And I have a lot of confidence in people's desire to do that in terms of what's happened with things like fax machines. There was never a concerted marketing plan to make fax machines as universal as they are. But there was a universal desire on people's part to express themselves and to communicate ideas. So anyway, I'll just say that in thinking about technology, this young man changed my perspective totally in the sense that I realized that there were different expressive styles and that technology had made that possible. The reason I put the story at the beginning is because none of that is going to come up in the rest of this, because I learned some more things since then that I'd like to share with you. But that, like I said, the story that you told really did have meaning for me, and it is neat because there are students that are on the fringe. I think that we do have a system where we measure a particular skill, mostly linguistic skills, and if you're in the top 10%, then you get the A's. But there are a lot of different skills in the world, and we've really got to think about how do you both set a standard for excellence and recognize that there are many different kinds of excellence as well. And that's going to be an ongoing challenge. The discussion today I thought I'd share some other ideas with you. The title, The Mediacentric Generation on Campus. English is a wonderful language. Whenever you don't, is a growing dynamic language. Whenever you don't have the word you need, you just make it up. So that's, mediacentric is one of those words. And so, you know, the title itself of the presentation kind of really gives you the Cliff Notes version of this and says the bulk of it. Are you still calling your assignment a paper? The world is changing. And one of my goals for this presentation is by the end that when you go back to your campuses and talk to colleagues, that every time the word paper comes up, you just get a little bit of a second thought about just the process that we're going through and what the possibilities are coming to be. When you and I all went to school, doing a classroom project was a matter of going to a library, doing some research. We found the material on paper, and we expressed ourselves on paper. And when I taught science, when we did a lab report, even obviously in the relatively recent past, the techniques I used for those students were not really very different from what Newton and Joule did to communicate their experiments and ideas with the rest of the world. And you hear a lot about literacy and student projects and the work, but there's some things I want you to think about that in between that space of talking about literacy in general and the process that goes on in your classroom. The second thing I learned, I said the student was one watershed event. The other one was when I started doing some studies on, and it really was by pure accident, somebody actually sent, I was going to say doing some studies, somebody sent me a project that they had done on communication. And it was from a high school teacher in Hillsdale, Illinois, that sent his students to the Soviet Union like exchange students at the time. And so he was real interested in communication, and so he actually did a project himself on linguistics. And that started me on this road of realizing that the big thing in technology and the process that you see going on is this is about communication. What technology let that student in a classroom do, I talked about having different expressive styles. The expressive style, if that's the end of the analysis, is a hobby. Where it becomes very powerful is the fact that he was telling his story using another option. The classrooms that we all came out of pretty much said, great, if you're good at footnotes, bibliographies, and linguistic learning, come on up to the front, and if you're not, go on to the back and just at least stay quiet, and if you can't stay quiet, leave. There is no cosmic law that says that although a small percentage of human beings can master the encoding and decoding of phonetic schemes and words, that all human beings are naturally inclined, and that there's a direct correlation between that and their overall set of skills and value to their community. But communication in technology, what's happened on this desk, part of what's transformed this desk, is that students can tell their stories in a lot of different ways. And I think that's pretty obvious from just saying, okay, it's multimedia, I go for that, there's more channels, that's great, I understand all that. But I want to think about this idea of literacy too, and what it means to be literate. Most of you would probably say, I think it's a pretty easy answer to say being literate is being able to read and write, instructions, books, products, that sort of thing. I was on a plane flying in Minnesota, and the lady next to me opened up this newspaper that you see at the bottom. It was a Russian newspaper printed in the United States. And when I went to the Soviet Union some years ago, the instant I got off the plane, I suddenly had a visceral understanding of what it was to be illiterate. A few time zones and a few hours earlier, I was a reasonably well-adjusted and functioning adult. Your own opinions aside on that subject. But suddenly, you go to France and there's a sign that says, or something goes by that says "un taxi" on the outside. You kind of, hey, I kind of get that. If there's a sign in Mexico that says "El Aeropuerto," or Aeropuerto or whatever, you can kind of get that. So you don't feel so bad. You look at this newspaper, and you don't have a clue. You can't sound it out. You're suddenly just out of the loop. And obviously there are other things. If your world is music, there's a whole form of communication for that. If this presentation was being done at Gallaudet College, and I couldn't communicate with you in American Sign Language, we'd have a problem. So literacy, I think, is really being able to communicate in the medium of your society. So it's not just reading and writing, but you've got to look at it in the context of what's around you and say, can I, based on where I'm dropped at that moment, it's not it's not just a quality like whether you're a nice person or not. It's a specific relevant skill set. So, one thing to look at would be, if you're literate in our society, presumably you can read books and magazines, write letters to mom, I put some games on here just for fun. And so if we look at those in our society and see, well, what do they look like these days? Let's take a look at books. And the one in the upper left here, Alice to Ocean, you might be familiar with. That was in fact, it's being sort of repeated. There's, what is it called, Cyberspace, A Day in Cyberspace, that the photographer that did Alice to Ocean is doing like any day now with internet and photographs and stuff. But anyway, Alice to Ocean was a neat book. It was subsequently redone by Claris and National Geographic in a CD-ROM form. And this isn't the only one. Michael Crichton's Jurassic Park you can get on CD. These aren't unusual. You're seeing more of these if you go into a B. Dalton and a software, etc. The content of those shelves is identical. There's the dictionaries, the thesaurus, how things work, the Sports Illustrated calendar. Dr. Ruth got her stuff on disc now. Anything that's in the bookstore is on CD-ROM. And so it's just a question of whether you want to buy it on smashed up trees with vegetable dyes or flattened plastic. And I was talking to a meeting of the American Reading Association about, I'm easily distracted, by the way, American Reading Association, that's where I was, about saying we have to remember that we all have inherited a 500-year tradition of being the defenders of knowledge and personal expression. The medium for that happens to be smashed up trees, but there's something about graven images that comes to mind here. Being the defenders of personal expression doesn't mean that you physically have to protect cellulose. And this becomes very relevant when you go back to your campuses and talk to the people in the literature department who have, and strangely enough, the art department, who have a strong reaction against technology and think that somehow it's over there and they're over here. The funny thing is, God does have a sense of humor, no matter what people say about her. All of the language arts people have been, every night before they go to bed, they say their little prayers and send them heavenward, saying, I just wish that everybody would write just a little bit more every day. It would just be so nice if people would just write a little bit more every day and use language more. Wouldn't that be terrific? And God said, okay, done. And today, there is more writing taking place through email. Yes, they're sending that right now. There's more writing taking place through email and online services than at any time ever before. There's just an incredible amount of writing taking place. It doesn't happen to be on yellow-lined paper. But a tremendous use of language is taking place. The people in the language arts departments, have a real contribution to make at this point in terms of giving us guidance about what's going on in the world. Whoops, hold on. We're supposed to go to some exciting other screen here. Okay, what was it? Aha. Well, if everything just worked perfectly. Oh, there we go, sorry. Helps if you can drive the mouse. I knew there was a button there somewhere. So where were we? Anyway, so all this writing is taking place. The strange part is if you think about the art department, they went through a similar thing. I was talking to the art association and saying, you've gone home every night and prayed and said if only people would draw more and be more creative visually, that would really be terrific. So what happened? Well, every project that a student does, increasingly, like I said, there's 1 million kids that I know of right now on a daily basis using art every day as a significant component of the communication process. And those people in the art department have a tremendous contribution to make to your technology programs. Some of the other examples there, I sort of got off on a left turn of something I was going to show you, but I think you get the idea, whether it's a magazine, a catalog, recreational games, all of those are available today in electronic form. And there's a pure, all the planning committees and the celestial, statistics that we can do aside, there's a pragmatic reality that just says a disc out of plastic is a lot cheaper than a shelf full of books of paper. And if for no other reason than just pure economics, electronic information is going to be with us. So it's coming whether we plan for it or not. But things definitely have changed. So we're moving from a word-based world where I said having some linguistic skills was great, to really, as I call it, a media-centric society. And in fact, another little aside here. I don't know. I promise I would keep these digressions down to 37, just to keep things under some sense of control. But another little thing to think about is if somebody was going to be violently opposed to technology, it in fact should be the class of people, of attorneys and architects, and I don't know about architects, but sort of think of all the generations of people whose families have always done well, who go to nice private schools and costly higher ed institutions, who for some reason may in fact have a genetic predisposition to dealing with words. That would be a reason to be violently opposed to technology, because in some day in the future, the next generation of these kids are going to come into the counseling office, and the counselor will be there and say, yes, I know your child has been having trouble in our school, and we've conducted an extensive series of tests, and we have isolated the problem, and I'm afraid they're, well, yes, dysgraphic. And in the past, I know your family did pretty good because all the dyslexics, didn't do too well in our system. But things have changed, and visuals are kind of getting to be real important. And we have noticed that this problem with dysgraphia can be a significant problem in society. But we have some special little exercises and activities and therapeutic things we can go through, and we'll discuss those later on or whatever. So anyway, that's something to think about. So there's a new word. If that appears in the dictionary someday, you can say you heard it here first. So students aren't going out to the library anymore. They're going out to CD-ROM. They're going out to internet. And if they're going out to internet and electronic forums for their information, increasingly when they sit down in the classroom and you say, okay, we've just gathered all this great information, now let's get out the lined paper and pens. I think in that innocent way that especially the young kids do, they'll say, oh, is this a historical exercise? Is this the way they did it when you were a kid? That's when you want to smack them, of course, because it's true. The other place that I just want to mention is the community. One of the things that is transforming because of technology is the ability to go out into the community with video cameras, digital cameras, and in fact the last two, internet and community, are pretty tightly woven together on two senses. One, a community can now be an inexpensive publisher of locally relevant data. The beauty of internet is not that every server try and contain all information. The beauty of internet is that each particular server can gather the information that they're best at gathering. And so in your community, the kind of information that's typically locked up in the local historical society museum suddenly can be online. And the students can be much more involved in their community because of access to that information. The technology itself has also become portable so that even if that information doesn't happen to be on internet, they go out in the streets and they do the interviews with the parents and the people in the markets and the whatever, and bring that back into their projects. There's a nice part, of course, about internet that says that our definition of community gets a lot larger, which personally I find very nice. But there is something else here, which is to say that information, as the saying goes, may be food for thought, but it's not the whole meal. The value of content is going to plummet. However, if you've noticed that what's happened with clip art discs, just think about how much it used to cost to buy one diskette with 30 images on it or whatever, and now the fact that Corel sells, 15,000 images for $99 or something. I mean, there's probably some wonderful little chart you could do there. But the value of raw data, and by value I don't mean in some wonderful cosmic sense, but surely the pennies per byte to get it We have access to a great deal more information now at far lower costs. What is going to become increasingly important is context. How do you take all that information that you suddenly have access to and put it together into a meaningful project and a meaningful presentation? And I thought I'd show you one example that I found particularly interesting. This is from a Canadian school. This is from a 14-year-old at the Lower Canada College. Now up there they call, it's a K-12 school, but they call it a college so they can get more money from the parents. And you can see he's got a tie, and it's a very distinguished looking institution. And his project, and this was very interesting to me in the sense that last October they held an election that the deciding portion of the vote was literally 1%. It was 49.5 on one side to 50.5 on the other for whether Quebec should secede from Canada. And it is odd to me that if this were happening in Mexico, I guess because we all know of names like Zapata, I think people would get excited because they'd, have vivid images. The Canadians just seem so civilized, why should we worry about it? But to think of this sort of a political dynamic happening. In fact, some of you that were in the booth and met Maureen, that was doing the demonstrations today, she was a teacher in Montreal before she started doing HyperStudio things. And I'll just say that one of the students in her classroom, their grandfather in the last referendum was literally kidnapped and ended up in a trunk, dead, unfortunately. And so they were putting bombs in mailboxes. We think the Canadians are well behaved, and by and large they are, but this is a serious issue. And the dynamics of what's going on are intense. Anyway, so this was a project that a student did that I guess the point of all that is to say this isn't something that you can just go out and get a book and read about it, or even look in the newspaper for that matter. And in terms of all the sources of information, there are some neat things that you can see in what he's doing. One, this is sort of the outline. A good question is, what's the outline for a project in a media-centric environment as opposed to just pages being turned? The little bit in the upper corner is kind of neat in terms of tools they have available. Many of you have seen the TV, or the computers that now have a TV card in them. That little bit was captured off of a TV of a rally that one side or the other was happening. And so that was like I think the 630s, Apple flips their little numbers on the computers all the time, so I have no idea what the current equivalent is. But on the Mac 630, there was a tuner you could get for it. On PCs, you can get them for a few $100s. But anyway, there are just a couple screens I wanted to show you. There's some interesting things of just miscellaneous text and textual descriptions of some issues. But he also did things like literally went outside and the people were putting flags on their balconies of either the maple leaf or the fleur-de-lis, depending on their position on the subject. He put together his own little collage. The little movie in the upper right corner is basically a collage of a book by Trudeau and buttons and flyers and things from the previous referendum, just to add kind of a little bit of atmosphere and convey some of the feelings of all of this. He also interviewed different people, including himself actually, and I'll just play you one of these clips here, just as kind of interesting.
David, what do you think about the referendum?
Well, as a youth, at first I thought, why would they want to separate from such a great country like Canada, which provides Medicare and many social services? But now that I have been studying it in Canadian history, I have seen how there has always been a difference or conflict between English and French. But I don't think this conflict is enough to start a whole new country, breaking up one of the best countries in the world. It was rated the #1 country twice in a row by the United Nations, so we're obviously a well-off country. So I don't think Quebec should go about breaking up.
And it's just, if you think about the kinds of things and the sort of personality that would be brought forth in just a written paper, to me, a lot of people are worried about saying that technology is dehumanizing. Personally, I find it exactly the opposite. When you get 30 reports from students that went to a library and all paraphrase the same encyclopedias or the same, like that, I've been here a long time. Doesn't it occur to you that the last 20 years of people would have used those same materials and I'd kind of recognize it? Any of you who have been involved in students doing technology projects, I think have seen, and some nods would be good at this point to help me out, or whatever. But I mean, have you seen that you get 30 projects back which are all completely different? That each one that conveys the individuality of that student? It's just incredible. And like I said, something like this, there aren't, it is really neat. Anyway, yes, there's crowds again. I want to show you another part, which is really probably the most amazing part of this particular project from a technology standpoint and from a classroom experience standpoint. He can go to the paper and look at the Gazette and find out what they think about technology, or I'm not to find out about the referendum and what's going on and all that sort of stuff. But they're biased. There was a rally where, depending on which paper you read, either 30,000 or 130,000 people attended it. And you can't go to a textbook, so what do you do? Well, I think in the absence of perfectly reliable truth, the next best answer is to have each position represent their own interests the best they can, and let the dynamic of many voices try and be able to resolve the truth from that. And that's in fact what he did during this referendum, and these are still posted now. There were, and I've just picked a few to show you, there are 15, as they call them, politically charged websites, where each faction, the newspaper, the Quebec government, the federal government, ministers in the government, individuals who had an opinion, posted information on websites specifically about their views. And so, for example, we can go to the yes side by clicking on his project. It literally triggers Netscape to go to, he said, yes, yes, yes. Literally triggers Netscape to go out to that site and retrieve that day's information. So in this case, it's the yes side with things, and they actually, I have to say, had the better website, which is both funny and interesting, thought-provoking. But they have the text, for example, of the Declaration of Sovereignty. They have press releases. You can get the text of any speeches that occurred or whatever. But that's just one side. If we come over to the no side, you can click on that. And again, it'll direct Netscape to go out. And the point of this is, I guess the reason I want to show you this one is, I think some of you are comfortable with the idea of going out to the internet to do research. I mean, it's pretty nice as far as, computers these days, you can do things like, say, copy, come back and say paste, and put something in a project. So that's kind of classic research using internet today. But what he did in this project was really different. Whoops, hold on here. He said, oops, slow down, Roger, okay. What he did was essentially wove into the presentation real-time data. So on one hand, you've got browsing as kind of a concept where a person is in a browser and just kind of, is looking around. And then there's another one where you think of them sort of grabbing up everything they've gathered and then they put it in a can. This is really somewhere different, and I don't have a huge, I can't tell you all the places it's going to go, but I am hoping to communicate here that something's intrinsically different, where in the middle of a presentation, if somebody said, well, the no side just had a rally last night, and they said, and to be able to go to that and show the dynamic in real time. And the other point is, the information here is so extensive, you couldn't copy it all in. And why do it? I mean, why even copy? If all you need is a flag, or you were doing research and you just wanted the state bird for all the states in the United States, that's the sort of thing you might go out and gather little bits of. But in something like this, it isn't a matter of gathering the information, it's a matter of weaving in that part of the world into the presentation in class at that moment. And I think that's just, it's just one more example of the incredible kinds of changes that are taking place in terms of what a student can do. And in fact, I'll say, if you look at where the changes are occurring in our country right now and saying, who are the most demanding users of technology, it is the elementary school student. And it's elementary schools right now are buying technology at twice the rate of high schools and higher education. And this is where I always say this for sort of towards the end, because this is where I get thrown out of things like this. But I'll just say that I believe that the elementary school model is the one that's going to set the tone for the coming century. And the reason is that if you think about it, it's 1850, and you're a teacher, and you've been sent to the middle of the prairie, and the worst thing that could happen to you would be to go home, for the kids to go home and tell their parents, I asked the teacher a question today, and they didn't know the answer. That would be bad, because they've gone to such time and expense and trouble to bring you there, and you are the repository of all human knowledge, at least the best they could do that day. And when the kids ask, how big are the pyramids, somebody should know, and you're it. And so these ideas, if you look, I mentioned at the awards thing that to me one of the most satisfying parts of what I do is that there is a huge correlation, nearly one-to-one as I can see, between people that want to change education for the better and people that are interested in technology. And this little classroom thing, these ideas of student-centered learning, student-directed learning, a constructivist approach to learning, these ideas have been around for a long time. But if we're back in 1850, there's only so much a kid can do out in the cornfield. We can learn a little bit about some biology and ecology, and there's some stuff there, but there's no way to find out how tall the pyramids are, so the teacher has to know. But in today's world, a student sitting at a computer has access to a huge amount of information. Suddenly, the best thing the teacher can be is a facilitator and a guide to how to learn things that they don't, because there are an awful lot of things. And what's happened in Reason Elementary School, think of a giant sort of biological experiment where you create 50 different life forms and see which one does the best in a particular environment. In a way, what's happened is elementary school was one particular model at a certain time in history, and I think some of the sense was, well, those are the little kids, it doesn't matter what we do with them. And elementary school teachers have to be real comfortable with the fact that they don't know everything. Because the first day you go into class, a kid comes in and brings you a jar with something nobody's ever seen before. And the answer has to be, no, I don't know what it is either, but how would a person find out? Let's learn how to find out. And when they study whales, they don't just study whales, they say, well, how deep do they dive in the ocean, and what was the economics of why they were hunted, and let's sing some whale songs. And you find that all of the knowledge is woven together. That is the model that will, I think, be very effective in the coming century and starting today. And that's what's so neat about this conference, is the people that come to a conference like that, everybody I've talked to, that's the feeling I get, is that you all are interested in playing a part in changing that classroom experience. Of course, the challenge is, how do you take that message back? But I want to show you, in fact, some things that I think that will encourage you. And one of them is just a quick project from an elementary school in terms of what a third grader is doing in a classroom. And this is one where she filled 3 jars with different levels of water, but I'll let her explain it.
Hi, I'm Carrie Hershey. I'd like you to notice how the sound changes depending on the water level.
And in that little bit, a lot of things change. One, this is what I would call the appropriate use of technology, meaning, as I said, as a science teacher, writing on my lab reports on graph paper books was the way they did it 200 years ago. But if you think about, if I said write on paper that concept of jars with different levels of liquid and the fact that it sounds different, pitch, well, pitch is whether it's a high or a low sound. Well, high or low is, everything is referencing something else. The person has to know the concept, essentially, if they're going to understand the words you wrote. The best you can do is tell them something they already knew. In this case, I could send this to the Soviet Union or anywhere in the world, and she could communicate the idea that jars have a different sound based on how much water is in them and exactly what's going on. That movie fits, this whole project with a number of more screens fits on a single floppy disk. QuickTime movies or AVI take figure 10 seconds on a floppy disk. So you can't put a movie in terms of a 2-hour feature film, but that's an entertainment and a consumer issue, not a learning question. Can we show this phenomenon on a floppy disk that a student has in their pocket? The answer is yes. The other thing I like about that is her whole presentation, when she was standing there and said, hello, this is Karen Hershey, and I'm whatever. Her teacher didn't model that. She saw that on the evening news. And she's doing exactly the same process that adult communicators do. And I used to go home every night from the classroom, with this burning question in my mind, the terrible question the kids ask, which is, why do we Why do we need to learn this? What's it ever going to be good for? Right? Now, there's always a question behind the question. And to explain that, I'll just say that when a friend says, what are you doing Saturday night? Before you answer, the question is this party time, or is this fixing that stuff in your garage that you've already made worse by your tinkering with it so far? Right? So there's always a question behind the question. So when the kids are asking, what do I need this stuff for? They haven't gone through some deep analysis of society and culture. What they're really saying is, I haven't seen too many other people doing this. When I go home, my mom just doesn't factor polynomial equations. I don't know what it is, but and we don't have a chem lab, in the rec room. So what's going on? And if you think about it, human beings are instinctively driven to do what big people do. And the answer, by that, what I mean is, you can go over to a wall in your house, and if there's a little 3-year-old running around, you can just play with a bit of lint on the wall, and they'll come over and say, what are you doing? Can I help? Can I do it? Get out of the way. And it doesn't matter whether that's a piece of lint or changing a tire in the driveway. Their reaction is the same. And my feeling about that's pretty simple to figure out. They're looking around saying, well, all the big people are fed, and the bears haven't eaten them, and they're doing okay, so it's not a bad idea to do what they do, whatever it is. And sometimes those whatever it is maybe things like smoking, but that's an instinct. And so when people say, wow, how come kids are so excited by technology? It isn't the Sesame Street thing, it's just a gratuitous lights and sound and color, and kids like that. No, they're much smarter than that. Instinctively, deep down inside, they say, this is real. And if you haven't figured it out yet, I sure have. And the only thing comparable to this is if you put Ferraris in the parking lot and let us play with those at recess. And so they are instinctively driven to master what is obviously an adult skill. And for the first time, that's really possible. And so these, in these elementary schools, what's happening is they are creating a pressure on high school and increasingly on colleges to respond to the fact that the students coming into your classes have experience in technology and have experience with educational processes that actually have some merit to them. And so that's, those of you, I know a lot of people here are in essentially ed tech programs or training the elementary school teachers that go out there, and I want you to know that 5 or 10 years from now, you will, in the elementary school, whatever the rewards are of teaching elementary school with teaching people to tie their shoes and write and all that kind of thing, there's another political agenda that will have been accomplished, which is that the waves of these kids moving up through the schools will have profoundly changed the educational process, because once they have access to it, they're not going to give it back. And all of you that train those minds to go out into K-12 education, 10 years from now, you will have played, this is essentially a subversive meeting. If you haven't figured it out already, we are a group of subversives because we are enabling things that in fact, go beyond even any illusions of control we have over them in terms of the changes that are going to occur in society. And like I said, the good news is that so far, despite the neo-Luddites, as they're called, I think that the indications are the changes will be quite promising. In terms of what's happening in universities, there are a lot of programs where people are doing commercial projects, and like there's a class in commercial multimedia design. There are ed tech programs for people going into education. I think our biggest challenge from here on out is how do we bring the campus as a whole together with a concerted opinion about what we're going to do about this technology stuff, and what is happening with communication tools. For all the people that talk about lifelong learning and what a good idea that is, and collaborative work, what a good idea that is, there's still a lot of campuses where you can't get the teachers to go to an in-service, and the last thing they want to do is sit at the same part in the lunchroom with somebody from one of those other departments. But yet once they get in the classroom, it's a splendid idea. All you kids work together. That's a great idea. And you kids should always want to learn. Why, it's wonderful to learn something new every day. Anyway, part of doing this, I did go out and I went to, in my case, San Diego State, and talked to some people there. In fact, Bernie Dodge was one of the people I talked to in the ed tech program about just what's going on with what they, what are students doing in terms of projects in his class. And so I've got some little clips here I would share with you.
I think we're using new technologies. I think for the last year, I've not been accepting paper. For the last year, I know we're moving in this direction gradually, but in the last year, everything that gets handed in to me is handed in. Well, it's not even handed in on disk anymore. I get it emailed to me, or it's put up on the web, and I look at it on the web. So I'm not even walking out of a classroom with a box full of diskettes anymore. It's all vapor, it's all virtual, it's all electronic, and no more paper.
And so it's, he's in an ed tech program, so his comfort level with this is a lot greater, I think. But there are, one of their goals at San Diego State in particular is to get the entire campus thinking about the fact that if a student is in one class and it's okay to do your research and then your presentation in an electronic format, is it a bad idea to do that in some other class? And so these challenges are going to be there. What's happening? I mean, talk about incredible times to be alive, as the saying goes. A lot of us are comfortable in the fact that 500 years ago, people were being burnt at the stake and all that sort of stuff about personal expression and views of things. And it's easy to say, oh, we all believe in that stuff now because it's quiet now, and we all know what the right answer is. And there's God's little sense of humor again. We all get to go through that again. In the Indianapolis paper 2 days ago, there were 3 articles in the same edition of the newspaper. One about the ACLU and the telecommunications bill, and immediately filing a suit about whether that was constitutional. 4 pages later or something was an article about China and the people who have access to internet having to register with the police. That if you have internet access, then you have to register with the government. The third one was a high school where they had said, oops, internet's in the school, yeah, but we're going to limit access to that, and there's some issues here, and we're turning it all off, and somebody's looking at Playboy magazine at 3 o'clock, so we can't have that. And the student said, okay, well, I don't know if you've noticed, but actually we've been running your web page for the whole school district, and in fact, a lot of us sort of help out in the labs and things, and we're going on strike. And they did. And strangely enough, they said, well, okay, maybe we reacted a little bit quickly. Let's think about this a little bit more. And so there was some further discussions taking place. But that was in, I want to say, either yesterday or the day before his paper. And it was, to me, it was neat. I mean, it was really just amazing because there aren't clear answers to any of this. But what I do like is the idea that people might actually start, taking responsibility for what they do and thinking about things and I think it's time for a head count again about what we really do believe in. So anyway, these are certainly very interesting times. The last little bit here is to just say, is this the real world? I mean, okay, is this all just idealistic? Just, I don't know, whatever. We like playing with the wires and everything's pretty and it sounds like it's good for learning. But once you're out of here, it was just entertainment. Is this the real world? I like to tell people I'm actually sort of a 50-50 mix. Oh, in fact, some people have said I'm 2 of the nicest people they ever met. But therapy's helping, and so what I was going to say, I'm sort of an equal mix of idealist and cynic. And I found that to be a useful combination on occasion. I like looking for the best in everything I look at, but there's a sense of realism that says if not everybody's an idealist, what are some pragmatic things? And I'll just say that one of the projects that literally, as they say, changed my life was this one from a college professor, Dr.
Hi,
Elchak.
my name is Larry Elchak. This stack highlights my academic career and some of my professional involvements. Further information is available on the typed version of my resume.
And this was one of the first resumes that I had ever seen done on disk. The entire thing fits on one disk. And it's got neat things like you can go look at all the diplomas on the wall. In fact, actually, this is really great. Any of you that are looking for advanced academic credits with the new copy and paste functions, The time for that has been just really improved. But this is the part that really changed me. There were these little events that just, kind of shook my mind. And this was one of them. We were talking about visual, and most people are visual. Everybody's got a list of papers and books, and you can imagine if you were a math professor, how many people have written, Introduction to Algebra 101 sort of thing. People are visual. He scanned in the covers from the books that he'd worked on. And in some of the cases, Math Matters and MathQuest, I recognized the book from the cover. And what he's done on a single diskette has brought the experience of a first interview. Instead of having to fly all over the place, he can mail out 100 of these discs or go on internet and mail out and make it available to a countless number. But what he's done is really brought that first interview experience to it. We go into his classroom. He's got pictures. I mean, imagine this isn't just a resume in this sense. Suppose you worked in a warehouse and you did neat little places for the forklifts to park, and you had a whole inventory management thing and signs that you showed people. That would never come across in a printed resume. A resume today is 2 pages, and it proves you were born, educated, and employed somewhere, and that's about it. The real differentiation of yourself as an individual comes across in the first interview and in successive interviews. This allows Larry to be a more powerful communicator, and this is the cynic in me. All the planning meetings and all the futurism aside, the bottom line is he's out there competing with us. And 10 years ago, it was impossible to desktop publish a resume. It was impossible. The computers and the laser writers and that stuff didn't exist. So you went to a commercial service and had something typed up and offset printed and whatever. Today, it's assumed that all of us would do a desktop published resume. That was 10 years ago, and it changed that quickly. I can tell you that this isn't the only one out there. These are floating around. And if sitting on somebody's desk, every business now has a computer. I mean, the penetration of PCs in business is essentially 100%. So anybody, whether it's the local dry cleaning shop to anywhere else, pretty much count on them having a PC. So you can be a better communicator to a potential employer through the electronic medium. So the point is, we're graduating, whether it's a high school or a university, we're graduating people who are going to go out in the world. And if they leave with the basic skill being how to do a paper resume, they are going to be competing with the people that, on their own, have figured out how to be a more powerful communicator. Imagine a stack of papers and a little disk there that can do everything this does in terms of telling a story.
My name is
Yes?
Larry Elchuk. This stack highlights my
Thank you, Larry.
academic career and some of my professional involvements. Hi, my name is Larry Elchuk.
Okay, Larry.
Hi, my name is Larry Elchuk. This stack highlights my academic career and some of my professional involvements.
Very good.
Further information is available on
Thanks,
the
Larry.
typed version of my resume.
Okay, one other one here, which I mentioned, resumes in terms of applying for a job. This one, there are high schools that now, as part of the application process to universities, many basic, well, in fact, I think all the Ivy League colleges at this point accept additional materials as part of the acceptance and application process. This is an electronic one of those, and basically it's a portfolio of things about journals on things, different projects he's worked on. There's lab reports, there's all kinds of things, but it's really the title page that does it for me. I'll just mention that Chris is a musician, and we can find out a little bit about that too. And before you even turn the page, you know more about Chris as an individual than any stack of papers that say 79% on U.S. history. And that is so powerful and so fantastic in making the world a better place. And all these students, all the parents and all the people who come in and say, well, my kid's smarter. How you just haven't figured it out. The good news now to any back to basics people, to anybody that say this is a serious institution, we need to stick to the fundamentals. Hopefully the most fundamental thing is recognizing that all of our students are individuals, and what we found is two things: a way to bring that individuality across and share it with other people, and also to prepare them for a world that's coming, whether we want it to or not. And so the choice is, would you like us to send them all back to the yellow paper rooms and practice their ciphers, Or would you like us to prepare them for a world where you can now go shopping for a house in a grocery store? I mean, in San Diego, they have a little kiosk called Home Search. And next to the pharmacy, you can put in how many bedrooms you want, how much money you can spend, any of the details you want, and up comes pictures of the houses. You can see them before you even go out there, and you can do that while you're waiting for a prescription to be filled. Anybody that's in 4th grade, as far as they're concerned, that's the way the world has always been. That's just the way things are. Okay. Well, the last little bit, kind of to close with here. Reed College did a really neat project. And in fact, what we'll do, in fact, we can send Netscape home here. Now, this little bit, because this particular one, actually, we're now leaving the environs of my hometown here. And this particular thing requires that I do a little control panel flipping here. But having done that, this is a CD done by Reed College where they took essentially the kind of material they would put, I don't know if it would be a student handbook, but the kind of promotional materials that you would send out to the world to encourage people to attend your fine institution. This was put on a CD. I think they're in Oregon, Medford? Portland, okay, sorry. Portland, Oregon. And they actually had a group of students put this together for them. Just hum along. Feel free to. I feel enlightened already. Okay. So anyway, there's the usual sorts of things. There's information on programs and, different events that are coming up. I like this one, fun with radiation. So here the kids are, just sitting around, it's Friday night, and they're saying, hey, let's go down and play with the nuclear reactor. What do you say? But this little bit, let's go to this one. This is a tour of the campus where you can go to different locations. And so I guess I actually have no idea which are which, so we'll just pick one, and hopefully it's not the nude volleyball championship. Although that is a very popular item on recruiting students in there. Elliott Hall. So this is kind of neat. Here's a picture of Elliott Hall. And what's amazing about this, though, is you can kind of come in and say, oh, I'd like to talk to some of these people. Or, in fact, I wonder, what's it really look like down the building and down the road a ways? And, in fact, really, is the whole campus like that, or is this like those real estate pictures where they got the one little bit that looks good and the rest of it's behind a recycling place or something? Hey, look at the manhole cover. That's right. The whole adventure game actually begins here. No. The experience of that and being able to communicate powerfully, I think, is incredible. And I guess the thoughts I'd like to leave you with are to say, if you're seeing that this offers possibilities to your campus, and if your campus is doing this kind of thing, I think it's incredible. The students coming to you are certainly interested in the next century of technology. If you're if you're looking at this and saying, wow, this would be a great thing to do, we ought to have our ed tech department or the technology department create some things like this. And this was done by students. They basically took a team of students. They went out with the cameras. These pictures, it's called QuickTime VR. You put a little camera on a tripod. It's actually got a little notch thing that goes. You take it just like that. Yeah, it takes 12 pictures, and it weaves it together into that scene that can be then sort of just pasted into your project, if you will. A team of about, I want to say I don't even think it was a dozen students. I have to go back and look, but it's a relatively small group of students did this. But I do want, like I said, I want to thank you for having me. Wait, not yet. I thought it. I want to thank you for having me here today, but leave you with the thought of just saying, if you like the idea of sending these things out and attracting those elementary and junior high and seniors from out there in the world that really are the media-centric generation, when they get to your campus, what are the assignments that you'll give them? that make your place the next step in their growth in education. Thank you very much indeed. What a neat group.